Okay, welcome everyone. Well, this is a very special occasion, and I first want to thank all the members of the Breslin family who are here. You're going to hear from a couple of them. I want to thank the whole family for everything that Jimmy did for New York City, and it's just amazing what this one man did for New York City. And I want to express my appreciation to his widow, Ronnie Eldridge, who I had the honor of working with when she was a city council member. And Ronnie, thank you for all you have done for this city. Thank you for your strong, never-changing progressive beliefs that you shared with your husband and the way you both put it into action all the time. Let's thank Ronnie for all she did for this city. And a lot of Jimmy's former colleagues are here, and I know it's an important moment for them, honoring this man and the way he lived and the way he wrote and the way he told us about ourselves. Here's what I want to say. I didn't know Jimmy Breslin well, but like so many New Yorkers, I hung on his every word because he spoke about the people, wrote about the people. He looked at this city from the ground up, from the grassroots up. And what was so extraordinary about him was no matter how famous he became, no matter which prizes he won, he was the same person. Understood everyday working New Yorkers and wanted to talk about them. He didn't want to focus on the famous and the powerful. He wanted to focus on everyday people. And he wanted us all to be held accountable for what we did for everyday people, or if we failed to help everyday New Yorkers, we had to be held accountable for that as well. And that's something to really stop and reflect on. How did one man, proud son of Queens, managed to epitomize the life of this whole place? How did one man manage to capture it all? Again, I didn't know him in the way that I could give you a conclusive answer, but I could tell you what I think. I think it's because he had so much heart. I think when he wrote about everyday people, it was out of empathy and honoring their lives, their struggles. He understood that the rich and the famous and the powerful had it easy, but everyday working people constantly struggled, and he epitomized their lives in his writing. And he tried to point us towards a different and better society that was actually based on the needs of the people. And the fact that he disrupted the normal approach, I think that was the normal approach when he was writing. It's the normal approach today to focus on the bold-faced names, but the bold-faced names ultimately don't make history. Everyday people make history. The world changes from the grassroots up. But it's amazing how rarely we actually see in our public discourse trials and tribulations of working people. And I was just talking to some of the family members about how everyday New Yorkers would call out to Jimmy all the time because they felt, everyday New Yorkers felt he was their tribune, he was their voice. Someone actually saw them, someone cared about them. And he used his fame to tell their stories. So that's a lot to celebrate. He's going to be remembered with his name on this street. He's going to be in some very good company. Other extraordinary people who share this intersection with him. But what's particularly true about Jimmy is that he wanted us to see what too often people didn't see, and he was willing to put all on the line to tell their story, the story of everyday people. He was willing to do what was unpopular. He was willing to express his views even when they weren't the majority views. He just felt it. He felt what he was doing, and that's what made him great. So I think for this generation in the media, and a particularly charged and powerful time in our history, time when our values are on the line, maybe even our democracy is on the line. Think about what Jimmy Breslin did. Think about how he saw the world. Think about all the everyday people's stories who still aren't being told. Try to carry on Jimmy Breslin's tradition and what you do, because we all need a lot more of that. And he is so worthy of this honor here today. Let me now bring forward a member of his family who can tell you passionately who Jimmy Breslin was and what he meant to the people of New York City. It's my honor to welcome Jimmy's son, Kevin. There you go, Kevin.
Thank you very much.
That
was great. Thank you so much. Hello, thank you all for coming. I'm Kevin Breslin. And on behalf of all of our family, I'd like to thank Mayor de Blasio for adding our father, Jimmy Breslin, to the illustrious list of the greats who've had a street naming in this city. No other city in the world could pair a New York writer from Richmond Hill, Queens, with the great Israeli leader Yitzhak Rabin and the great humanitarian Nelson Mandela, a Pulitzer Prize winner and Nobel Peace Prize winner, so close on lampposts in our city. And that's the magic of New York. My father said, "Rage is the only quality which has kept me or anybody I have ever studied writing columns for newspapers." Well, the great newspapers that he wrote for, the Long Island Press, the Journal American, the Herald Tribune, are long, long gone, including the Daily News across the street where he received his Pulitzer Prize is no longer on this street. The city just changes and it moves forward. My father often intoned, "Fame is fleeting. It comes fast and goes faster." However, real news, as the mayor said, not fake news, and the power of observation will never cease in this city. New Yorkers and their stories, they mattered monumentally to our father as he pounded away all his beautiful, funny, powerful, and often poetic ways for 80 some odd years. This prominent street sign behind us here will have a great lasting impact for some young person who wonders, who is Jimmy Breslin? They'll maybe look him up, Google him, and then out of nowhere, with complete and total energy, they'll create their own wonders with verbs as he did in this city. He'd proudly smile because he'd often tell me, "Oh, they're out there. There's great minds coming. They're young. Look out. They'll come. Just watch. They'll be big." And I love that about him. He was always optimistic for the future, especially for anyone young. So our family thanks Mayor de Blasio and his outstanding staff, Emma Wolf and Marco Carrion, for this wonderful honor. And he would often growl to me, "If you're looking for me, dial 1-800-HEAVENS." Thank you.
Great end. And it's true that Jimmy Breslin believed in the next generation, believed they could be great. And you're going to see some evidence now in his own family. His 10-year-old grandson, Quinn Breslin. Come on up, Quinn. Hold on, we're going to get you something to stand on. There you go.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Quinn Breslin, Jimmy's youngest grandson. I would like to thank Mayor de Blasio for honoring my grandfather today. Grandpa Jimmy would appreciate all of this, and he wouldn't even start yelling at everyone for being here. My grandpa started writing his own newspaper, called The Flame, when he was just a young kid like me, and he never stopped writing. I'm proud to see his name here on this street sign, and I hope it inspires other children to become writers in this city. Thank you for honoring him and keeping his legacy alive.
Good job.
Everybody's short.
Clap me high, brother. Well done. Great job.
Well done, pal.
Way to go. Way to go. All right. Well, even though Jimmy Breslin was rightfully tough on elected officials, some elected officials still want to praise him and thank him, including folks who represent this particular place. I want to bring forward State Senator Brad Hoylman.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm State Senator Brad Hoylman, and I represent this district. Thank you, Frank. Thank you for this honor to the family and to Ronnie Eldridge. It's such a pleasure to be here. It's such an honor to represent and have represented Ronnie and Jimmy Breslin in the state Senate. When I first got elected, someone asked me, "Who are some of the famous constituents? You're from Manhattan. Who you represent?" First name I came up with was Jimmy Breslin. So thank you very much. One of my favorite Jimmy Breslin quotes is, "When you leave New York, you ain't going anywhere." And so Jimmy's not going anywhere here on 42nd Street. And he's not going anywhere in our hearts and in our minds, and how all of us remember him as being a crusader for truth. And boy, couldn't we use a Jimmy Breslin these days? Amen. Thank you very much.
Amen. Well said. Thank you. The answer is absolutely yes, Brad. We could use a Jimmy Breslin nowadays. The nicest thing I can say to Liz Kruger is there's a lot of characteristics in Jimmy Breslin that you have as well, and you carry on every day. Senator Liz Kruger.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. So I'm the mayor and the senator in the neighboring district, but that's not why I'm here. I've known Jimmy and Ronnie pretty much, feel like my whole life. Ronnie went to college with my parents. And before I was an elected official, I did advocacy around government benefits for low-income people. And the most interesting phone calls I ever got in my life were the 11 p.m. phone calls from Jimmy Breslin saying, "So I just spent the day at the housing court," or "I just spent the day at a welfare center," or "I just spent the day at the homeless intake shelter center. I have to write, and my deadline is 7 a.m. I need you to stay up with me and explain to me what the hell is going on here." And I would know I was going to spend several hours on that phone call with Jimmy Breslin, and he was going to write something that would get into the hearts and minds of New Yorkers better than any advocacy or policy analysis that I and my colleagues could ever do, because he had an ability to translate big, complex, sometimes ugly government experiences into just the real life, "This is it, people. We have to do something," stories that he was so famous for. So to all the Breslin and Eldridge family who's here, what a gift you gave the city over and over again. And they don't make them like that anymore. So I'm delighted to see Jimmy Breslin's name up on any plaque anywhere in New York City. And people should never forget what he did. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
And now the Assemblyman who represents this fine corner, Assemblyman Dan Court.
Thank you very much. Assemblymember Dan Court, I'm lucky enough to represent this area. I want to thank the mayor for bringing us all here together. Like many of the speakers before, I did not have an opportunity to meet Jimmy Breslin, but I feel as if I did. I had the very great fortune of being friends with his sister, Deirdre Breslin, and I had that strange opportunity when you're a candidate to knock on her door in Roosevelt Island maybe 13, 14 years ago. And Deirdre didn't want to talk about Roosevelt Island or politics. She wanted to talk about Jimmy and his fight on affordable housing, something I cared about. So I learned of Jimmy, like many other people, through his writing, but also through his sister. And as my colleagues in government said, we could use a contrarian voice, someone who holds people accountable, electeds and all others, especially in this day and age. I learned that from Deirdre Breslin, who taught me so much about her brother, an iconic New York figure and someone who will be sorely missed. Thank you.
Amen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Deirdre will be very happy. Deirdre, that was great. Thank you.
All right, and is Brian Kavanaugh here? I haven't seen it yet. Brian. Okay, well then I want to introduce from the City Council someone who also carries on a lot of Jimmy's great traditions, Councilman Danny Drum.
All the way from Queens. But I came today as really mostly a friend of the family, because I also had the opportunity to actually hire Deirdre Breslin, and she worked in my office. And I've gotten to know Kevin and James very, very well, and of course Ronnie also. So I wanted to be here for that reason. But, you know, as one of the first openly LGBT people to be elected in Queens, Jimmy Breslin was also an LGBT activist. And he was one of the very first people to come out and to support our community. And I had the opportunity to speak to Jimmy in 1983 when we were trying to get a gay rights bill passed in the city council. And the Catholic Church and the Salvation Army was up in arms about it. I happened to have been a director of a daycare center in Harlem Harlem at that time. And Jimmy was saying, you know, look, there's a guy who's doing this work up in Harlem, working with young people, and he's not a threat to anyone at all. So I wanted to say thank you, Mr. Mayor, for putting this sign up, and it will be a reminder to everyone, especially to young people, about all the values that Jimmy Breslin stood for. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And just to prove that honoring a great man and a great New Yorker can be a bipartisan endeavor, special guest on the show, Congressman Pete King.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
Thank you, Mayor. It's really a privilege to be here today. It's great to see Ronnie again and Kevin, the entire Breslin family. I'm one of those people who I go back to reading Jimmy Breslin in the Journal American many years ago. I think I've read almost every word he wrote. Jimmy and I had one of those relationships which some people can identify with, where you had stages where we would talk incessantly, couldn't get him off the phone. Then I had days and years where he wouldn't talk to me at all. But that was Jimmy Breslin. And I'm talking to you today, Jimmy. Kevin assured me that if I showed up, Jimmy wouldn't start screaming at me or yelling at me or cursing me out. But I remember many evenings that Rosemary and I would spend with Ronnie and Jimmy and Michael Daly, I see here today. Again, he was a great friend, a great guy. To him, New York was not the elite, but it was the cab driver, the bookie, the bartender, just like at JFK's funeral. It wasn't all the world leaders who was there. It was the guy who was digging the grave. And that was Jimmy Breslin. And somehow I think Jimmy would like to dig graves for all of us at one time or another. But again, as usual, Jimmy's getting the last laugh. So again, this is a great honor for Jimmy, and it's a privilege for me to be able to join here with the Breslin family. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. All right. The moment of truth has arrived. We're going to unveil this important, beautiful plaque.
The right way. Quick goes and get it. You have to put it on the back, Mayor.
Okay, we're going to do this.
Get it here. You have to pull it.
We're going to team effort here. Team effort. Good job. Of course. You get your hand up high. There you go. Slowly. Slowly is the key. Quinn, you got it? Okay, here we go. Slowly, slowly. Dramatic effect. Hold on. Hold on. There we go. Ready?
Slow and steady. There we go. We knew you'd have it, Joe.
Good job.
Let's stand over here, everybody. Come on, family. Down in front, please.
Oh, my God. Queen, get in here.
Hey, Javon, move the... I got it.